When the Allied soldiers landed on these Normandy beaches, it was the first step on the road to capture Berlin and the beginning of the end of the Second World War. But on one of the 5 invasion beaches, it very nearly ended before it ever began, because here, on Omaha Beach, the American troops were slaughtered as they came ashore. The amazing thing is that 63 years later, historians and military experts are still trying to figure out why so many more men died here on this beach than on any of the others. After America joined the Second World War, the Allies agreed that victory over the Nazis would require a massive invasion of German-occupied France. Initial planning for D-Day actually began in March 1943. Codenamed Operation Overlord, it was to be a joint British, American and Canadian mission, and the biggest amphibious invasion ever attempted. On November the 28th, Stalin, Roosevelt and Churchill met in Tehran and decided that Overlord must be their main priority for 1944. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander, and General Bernard Montgomery, Commander of Land Forces. The D-Day invasion would be based on surprise and on devastating firepower, and much of that firepower would come from across the Atlantic. In North America, almost 2 million American and Canadian troops were assembled, although no one was told exactly where they were going. Among them was 19-year-old Private First Class Ray Tollefson.
We were obviously going to Europe. We got to the port, and there we see the Queen Elizabeth, which once again told us we had to be going to the British Isles. And we docked at Liverpool, and all the workmen, the guys on the dock, were yelling for cigarette yanks, and a guy got gum chum and all that. And so we were throwing them cigarettes. And then we boarded a train and we went on to Bude in Cornwall. And in Cornwall, they told us we were going to be billeted in private homes. And I was fortunate to end up with the Harry Ward family on, I think it was 21 Killerton Road, and it was a family thing. I was lonesome, you know, so it made it real nice. And it was neat living in town. Pub across the street, bank across the street, fish and chips up the street. It was real neat.
The scale of the D-Day plans was incredible. By April 1944, 2,876,000 troops were encamped in England. By May, the figure was well over 3 million. The whole of the south of England was one huge military training camp. The joint American, British and Canadian mission would be one of the Allies' greatest triumphs. But more than 60 years later, historians are gaining a new understanding into how it might have ended in disaster. Historian Simon True teaches at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and is also a D-Day expert. He's trying to discover how a potential failure on Omaha Beach was turned into a victory.
The Allied invasion of Normandy was to take place across a broad front, right along the Calvados coastline and at the bottom of the Cotentin Peninsula. It's a total breadth of about 80 kilometres, or about 55 miles altogether.
The plan was an ambitious one. The Allies would land 130,000 men at 5 different assault beaches. The British wanted the element of surprise. The US planners wanted time for an aerial bombardment.
The Normandy invasion is a function of a compromise. The whole thing is a function of compromise. If I gave a military problem to the British, right, not just an amphibious operation, any military problem, if I gave that to the British, they would come up with one solution. Right? If I gave the same problem, the exact same problem to American military leaders, right, they would come up with a very different solution. Now, let's put them both on the same battlefield and say that, gee, all right, come up with a plan for this. And what you're going to get is a compromise plan.
And this compromise plan would have serious consequences for the soldiers landing on Omaha Beach. The Allies knew that if an invasion of this size was to have a hope of succeeding, everything about it needed to be meticulously planned. and one of the first things they had to do was gather intelligence about the Normandy coastline. In London, the British government asked the BBC to broadcast an appeal to the public to send in any pictures or photographs they had of the French coastline. 30,000 postcards and photos of family holidays in France arrived in the next post. In total, the people of Britain sent in 10 million images, allowing the Allies to build up an incredibly detailed picture of the coastline. The D-Day planners seemed to think of everything. The invading armies would have to bring thousands of tanks and other heavy vehicles with them, so they had to make sure that the sand was hard enough for them to drive over without getting stuck. But how would they find out? The incredible solution was a Royal Navy X-craft. On the 18th of January 1944, a midget submarine crept across the English Channel. Under the cover of darkness, it surfaced just off the Normandy coastline. Major Logan Scott Bowden and Sergeant Bruce Ogden Smith swam ashore and coolly took samples of the beach for analysis back in England. It's a fantastic story. They crept ashore at night, right under the Germans' noses, to check that the sand would take the tanks. Across Britain, the D-Day troops were put into tough training camps to build up physical fitness.
I don't think there wasn't a day where we didn't have a speed march, where we didn't run at least 5-10 miles. That was just like getting out of bed.
The elite US Rangers were sent on extra training for a top-secret mission, with ladders borrowed from the London Fire Brigade.
You knew it would be something in the line of high hills or cliffs or something of that nature there.
We set up training down in the Isle of Wight, where there's some enormous cliffs down there, up at 200 feet in height.
And they drop these rope ladders down, you go scurrying up the cliffs, and then you get up to the top of the cliffs, and they had this rope that they'd come down, put around your shoulders and around your leg, and drop you down, and you grab it like this, and it'll stop you. And we did that. We were 19 years old, 20 years old. That was fun.
You're following a crowd. You're just going along whatever you're told to do, and that's the way you're trained. You're not trained to start analyzing and to suggesting you do this or that. You're doing what you're told, and that's what you go.
With so many troops assembled in Britain, the Allies knew their preparation was a complete secret. Hitler knew that the Allies were planning an invasion of Europe, and he'd ordered the building of a massive line of concrete gun positions, like this one, along the coast of occupied Europe, from Norway all the way down to the Spanish border. The Nazis boasted that it would be the greatest line of fortifications military history had ever seen.
The Germans knew that the Allies were going to invade Northwest Europe. From the Allied perspective, the key issue was not that they knew, but that they did not know exactly where.
The German High Command was divided as to where they thought the Allied invasion was most likely to come, but many in the German High Command thought it would come at Calais, the Pas-de-Calais, much further to the north. For the simple reason it's a much narrower part across the English Channel, less than 30 miles at its narrowest point. And of course the Allies knew that the Germans would be expecting this.
The Allies now set about fooling Hitler into thinking the invasion would take place somewhere else, distracting his troops from the real invasion site on the Normandy beaches. In Britain, a top-secret group called the London Controlling Section began one of the best deception plans in history. Entire armies were invented to fool the Germans. Dummy tanks were set up in fields and moved about at night so that the Germans would believe they were gathering for an invasion via Calais. Mock airfields were made more realistic by spraying weed killer to make wheel tracks in the grass. Canvas landing craft were moored off the coast.
If we could keep the D-Day secret intact, the Germans would not be able to focus their defenses on the point of attack. And that was the fundamental principle of the D-Day plan.
Using double agents, MI5 also sent messages to Germany about the presence of FUSAC, the first US Army group on standby in Kent and the southeast of England, to invade at the shortest route across the Channel, to Calais. FUSAC did not exist, but it distracted the Germans from these beaches.
The Allied deception worked remarkably well. The German High Command continued to think, even after the D-Day landings, that the Allies were going to land elsewhere. The deception was so thorough that they became convinced, because of the deception, that the Normandy landings, the actual D-Day landings, were merely a feint, that they were a first feint and that the main landings would occur later somewhere else. That's how good the deception plan was.
The German defences were strongest in the area around Calais, where Hitler was convinced the invasion would take place. Knowing this, the Allies decided instead to attack the less obvious and crucially less well defended Normandy coast. What they didn't know was that was about to change. And it would be a change that would affect the troops landing on Omaha Beach.
They did a study of the entire coast of France, and they selected the Normandy invasion. However, what you have to keep in mind is that they made that decision in 1943. In the end of 1943, in December of 1943, a guy named Hitler put a guy named Rommel in charge of the Western Wall. He was in charge of the defense of France.
Nicknamed the Desert Fox, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had fought the British to a standstill in Africa in 1941. He now set about turning the beaches of Normandy into what he called a killing zone.
In February of 1944, Rommel came down to the sector of the front called Grand Camp, what we later call Omaha Beach. He got on top of the bluffs overlooking Omaha Beach, and he said, "This is where the fate of Europe will be decided." And at that point, he decided to heavily reinforce Omaha Beach.
He changed the concept for the conduct of the defense. He started pouring concrete. He put in bunkers. He put in obstacles, wire, minefields, etc., etc. So when the decision was made for Normandy, it was not nearly as well defended as it was a year later.
The actual strength of Rommel's defences on D-Day is still a key issue for historians. Here on Omaha Beach, the whole area was by now covered in German fortifications, lots of them underground. They had artillery, machine gun nests, bunkers, living accommodation, all hidden away in the folds of these hills. I'm actually walking along the line of one of the German trenches now. But these were filled in after D-Day, so it's difficult to get an idea of what these places were really like. But a few miles over there, it's a different story. Military enthusiast Gary Stern has made an amazing discovery. An extensive German gun battery near the village of Grand Camp, just west of Omaha Beach. Buried since the end of the war, its re-emergence over 60 years later created news headlines.
Just to give you some idea of the size of the guns involved in this, this is one of the 155mm shells that we found here. This one's live. It's going to go in a big hole somewhere and disappear forever. But this is one of the actual ones that was found just here.
Stern has spent many months unearthing the site. So far, he's found 6 large German gun positions. Although they're several miles away, his theory is that they could have dropped massive shells on Omaha Beach. But one of the problems faced by historians in trying to understand why things went so badly wrong on Omaha Beach is getting a complete picture of the German side of the story. They too suffered heavy casualties, and many of their official records were destroyed in the war. Historian Simon True is eager to find out if the recently unearthed German battery at Maisie can help shed new light on the events of D-Day.
So all the trenches are the original trenches.
His initial research has shown that much of the work done here at the Maisie Battery was completed between the time of the planning for D-Day in 1943 and the actual invasion in 1944.
So this is one of the 155mm gun mounts that we found. It was buried approximately a metre under the soil, so everything around it was buried. So if you get the idea of the height here.
So above the level of the concrete here?
Yeah, it was above, I mean, we cleared this yesterday.
Yes.
But if you take another foot of soil on here, if you look at the distance it would have covered over here. So this was all buried. The guns are big things, you know, they're a large size gun. The range estimated by the intelligence reports after the battle was 13,200 yards.
And how far is Omaha Beach?
My understanding is about 7 miles, 7.5 miles, so I think...
But could these guns be the reason so many died on Omaha Beach? The rediscovery of Maisie Battery offers a new opportunity to find out just how strong the German defences along this part of the Normandy coastline were. The Allies knew there were large artillery guns here, but Gary has also uncovered many underground buildings.
And this is an ammunition tunnel.
Yeah.
So what you've got on the left here is 2 big rooms which would have held the explosives.
The charges.
In themselves. And that would be stacked high with shelving full of, steel shelving full of ammunition.
Okay. So this is the command centre for the entire Maisie Battery site,
so
yes?
It's organising everything that's going on on the site.
Gary believes that up to 400 German soldiers were based here, and he's also unearthed personnel buildings, offices, a medical post, and 2 miles of trenches within a 108-acre site.
So over here, covering the entrance steps down that we've just walked down now, you have a steel plate and a hinged door on it, and mounted into there is a small machine gun, would be covering the whole of that area, so a man could look through a pair of goggles up there and fire at anybody coming. The idea was that this was meant to be a strong point. Nobody could attack it, nobody could get inside it. Everything thick steel, heavily defended, and they could fire at people and keep
it's
people
only,
away.
what, 2 or 3 metres, isn't it, to
Absolutely.
the top of the steps?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, Hitler's ideal was that every man should last to the last bullet.
Yeah.
So on the left there, we've got an escape hatch for an ammunition store.
But after further research in official documents, Simon is not yet convinced that the Maisie guns quite had the firing range to reach Omaha Beach. But he believes that the site is an excellent example of how Rommel's influence had transformed the German positions along the coast.
The work done by Rommel's troops in late 1943 and early 1944 completely changed things. The defences of Lower Normandy on D-Day were much, much stronger than the defences had been even a matter of months earlier. And Maisie provides a nice illustration of how this work had been done, making things much more robust, much more sustainable, much more likely to be able to sustain Allied bombs than had been the case only months earlier.
As D-Day approached, the men preparing for one of the greatest military operations ever attempted were transported down to the ports along the south coast of England. Most of them still did not know exactly what they were setting out to do.
There was a marshalling area along the south coast of England. I estimate it was maybe 10 miles deep in from the coastline, and my recollection is there was no telephone calls permitted in or out, no mail permitted in or out, no transportation in or out. Well, the interesting word was bigot. There was secret, most secret, top secret, but the top of all was bigot. And that was the invasion plans.
We knew we were going over into France or the Netherlands or we were going back to what they call the Second Front. We were going to be part of the Second Front, and we knew we felt we were going to be leading it.
I can't recall anybody ever saying to one another, I wonder why we're doing this. We just knew we were going to go into combat. And I guess we were idiotic enough to look forward to it.
When you say, well, were you afraid of climbing the cliffs, or were you afraid to go in on the invasion, or you're afraid to do this or that, we were going to do it. There was a numbers game. Some were going to survive and some weren't going to survive.
What the American troops heading for Omaha Beach didn't know was that they would die in far greater numbers than the troops on any of the other invasion beaches. But the exact reason for this has always been hotly debated. It had been suggested by some that the Allies failed to fully recognize the strength of the German forces at Omaha Beach. By the end of D-Day, captured German soldiers were identified as being from the 352nd Infantry Division. This was a considerable surprise, as they hadn't been listed by Allied intelligence as being there. The question for some historians is, could extra German troops and artillery that the Allies didn't know about be the reason so many died on Omaha Beach? This German map was captured after D-Day, but has only recently been discovered in the US National Archive. The historian who found it is convinced it helps solve the mystery of Bloody Omaha.
One of the reasons that the U.S. casualties at Omaha Beach were so high was the presence of much more artillery than the U.S. Army expected. Because they didn't anticipate the presence of the 352nd Infantry Division, they didn't anticipate the presence of their artillery. That division had a full regiment of artillery. They had 30 tons of ammunition in the immediate area of the beach.
Zaloga believes these extra field artillery units would have enabled the Germans to drop shells onto any part of Omaha Beach from a few miles inland without being seen.
And all these little squares with all these little names are a trick that artillerymen use to direct fire very quickly and very accurately. So when D-Day occurred, all the forward observers had to do is they'd simply call in this name and say, I need 10 rounds of ammunition, I need 100 rounds of ammunition on this spot. Very, very quickly, very efficient, very deadly for the American troops on that beach.
So couldn't that be the answer then? It was a failure of intelligence. They underestimated the strength of the troops here.
I don't think so. The American intelligence analysts calculated that there would probably be about 800 to 1,000 Germans here at Omaha Beach on D-Day. And I think that figure is actually pretty close. Now, they didn't get quite the right formation. They missed the move forward of the 352nd Infantry Division to this area of Normandy. But I don't think actually that matters a great deal. During D-Day, there was something like 600 Germans probably in the beachfront defences, and they got maybe 1,400 reinforcements, so 2,000 men altogether. But they were very well armed. Lots of machine guns, mortars, plentiful artillery support. And the really important thing is that they've got dominating positions. From the bluffs, from these cliffs overlooking Omaha Beach, they've got superb fields of fire. They can dominate the beach, okay? So they can transform this area into a killing zone.
And it would be these dominating bluffs that would hold the real key to attacking Omaha Beach. Across the channel, the American soldiers who would have to land here were told to get ready. By the end of D-Day, thousands of them would be casualties.
And I think it was on, and I'm guessing it was June the 1st. We still didn't know where we were going to go, but they put us on trucks. And I remember the canvas was off 2.5-ton trucks, and they trucked us down to a port. And that port happened to be Weymouth. Put on landing craft and taken out to the mothership. Still didn't know where we were going.
On June the 4th, after a 24-hour delay due to bad weather, Eisenhower gave the order to depart. The invasion fleet of 7,000 vessels, 350,000 men and several million rounds of ammunition was ready. The planning was over. The invasion of Europe had begun.
I counted 147 in the line that I was in of vessels going across the channel. On my left-hand side, there was another column of ships. It goes from horizon to horizon. On this side, another column of ships, horizon to horizon. I mean, this is unbelievable as to the size of it. And the term that I use is like a coiled spring. And there wasn't anything that was going to stop this.
Some people were reading, had stuff to read and that there. And maybe some were writing letters, but I wasn't in a mood to write letters then. They had a church service or something like that if people wanted to go into a little bit of that, but it never got to be a big thing. But a lot of the fellows that wanted to that there, well, they had the opportunity if they wanted to do that. But there was definite quietness and resolve, and you knew it was a numbers game. You knew some of us aren't going to be around.
Although the men expected the invasion to be difficult, those heading for Omaha Beach were in for a particularly rough time.
Omaha Beach was potentially a nightmare to assault, and the Americans realised this. If we look at the shape of the beach, both in that direction and across it, we can see that it's got all sorts of challenges. Landing at anything other than high tide is going to leave you exposed on the beach over hundreds of metres of open sand. And then if you do get to the top of the beach, we can see this great long line of what the Americans call bluffs, about 100 feet high. And the Germans had defence positions on the tops of the bluffs, dotted along the entire 6,000 or 7,000 metres of the coastline. The beach is also curved. This means that fire from this end, what we call enfilade, grazing fire, fired at a low level, the rounds are going to go an awfully long way until they come into contact with something. So really, really difficult place for the Americans to assault on D-Day.
They said all rangers to your stations, and it must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning. So we got all our gear together and went to our stations where we were assigned to get into a specific landing craft. And we were like corks, just like this. And the cork was, the landing craft was flying up and down in the water. Guys were getting seasick.
Water was coming over and we were bailing with our helmets and everything else. It was rough, and you were concerned about losing the craft. They were not big, and we really bounced around in that thing. And in fact, one was tipped over from F Company. A number of the fellows drowned.
The plan was that from 6:30 a.m., 34,000 men, complete with tanks and artillery, would land in successive waves in a predetermined order along the length of Omaha Beach. An amphibious invasion is one of the most difficult military operations. Think about it. If things begin to go wrong, you can't retreat because behind you is the sea. The success of the invasion plan was based on getting the troops off the beach as quickly as possible. Was to keep them there. In the weeks before D-Day, thousands of obstacles were placed in the sand. Huge metal gates, booby traps, and metal constructions called check hedgehogs. They were designed to blow up the landing craft and slow the troops down, creating a killing zone on the beach.
The majority of the killing, majority of the deaths will take place on the beach. That's where it will take place, and you want to get off of there as soon as possible.
To make sure the men could get across and off the beach quickly, a massive aerial bombardment was planned. It was designed to take out the German positions dug in all along those hills. 450 American bombers assembled over Britain and headed towards Normandy. Once there, the plan gave them less than 30 minutes to drop 1,300 tons of bombs on the Omaha Beach defences. Out at sea, the Navy were also to bombard the coast with their guns.
The idea is that before the troops go ashore, the German defenders will have been hammered from the air and from the sea. They will have been pummeled by a relentless bombardment, lasting in this case about an hour before the Americans go ashore at Omaha Beach.
Well, man, when you watched it coming in, it was a major fireworks there, like the big battleships and cruisers and the rocket launchers. It seems like they could run off like about a dozen at a time, you know, and just scads of those going up there that you felt, sure, oh boy, this is going to be a cakewalk, you know.
The aerial bombardment of Omaha Beach was absolutely critical to the core plan. And very simply put, the quantity of bombs descending from the sky against the German defenders was thought to be so intense that nobody could live through it, or those who did live through it would be so stunned as to be incapable of defense.
And then along about 5 o'clock in the morning, I think, we hear this big roar of the bombers, the B-24s, tons and tons of shells. And we said, oh, now they're going to get it, you know.
It was just overwhelming to see the number of, you can't imagine that many planes being in the world, just in that one spot. It would look like they were wing to wing.
It was claimed that American precision bombing could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel, and soldiers were assured that the German beach defences would be completely hammered. One senior commander even told his troops that they'd have front row seats at the greatest show on earth. The only problem was, it was a complete disaster.
The United States had a doctrine that was called precision bombing, daylight precision bombing, and they bragged that they could put a bomb in a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Now, they had nowhere near that kind of accuracy. That was impossible.
And the actual morning of the invasion, the coastline of Normandy was just a ball of fire. Just from horizon to horizon, just fire. Constant. And that was the bombardment that was going on. And there's nothing going to survive in that, or at least that was the thought. Well, when you got close to shore, you found that wasn't true, but you couldn't turn back.
Americans needed daylight precision bombing. So what they did was they gave them 30 minutes, actually less than 30 minutes, to bomb the beaches there. The only problem is that they missed.
The aerial bombardment was a complete failure. The German defences were completely intact, and now they knew the Allies were coming. The element of surprise had vanished.
We were told that they were going to bombard the beach. We were going to bombard the cliffs. Well, as far as we were concerned, they didn't. I don't know where they dropped the bombs or anything or what they did, but when we got there, hey, they were all there waiting for us.
Key to the success of the landings on Omaha Beach was a special mission to capture a German stronghold called Point du Hoc. Perched on top of 130-foot-high cliffs just to the west of the beach, it was made the #1 target and would be attacked in the first assault wave.
The Allied High Command believed that the mission here at the Point du Hoc was absolutely critical to the success of D-Day. If the guns at the Point du Hoc were still functioning, with their range, which was 23,000 metres from this position, there was a real danger that they might be able to shoot at, damage, sink Allied shipping out in the Bay of the Seine. So from the American point of view, First Army success at Omaha Beach was integrally tied to the assault at the Point du Hoc.
In the end, the plan they came up with was not a complicated one. They decided that the best way to attack Point du Hoc was to land men on the beach down there and for them to just climb the cliffs right under the noses of the Germans up here. It beggars belief they'd have had to climb under fire and then, if they did make it to the top, take on the Germans who were just waiting for them. Lieutenant James Ike Eichner was among the 225 hand-picked men from the elite US Rangers chosen for the mission.
We were surprised that the enemy position atop the cliffs at Point was as big and dangerous as it was. And it absolutely had to be neutralized. The whole operation would be in danger and jeopardy.
But the guns the Rangers were ordered to attack had already been moved inland by the Germans to protect them from bombing raids.
On D-Day, there's even some evidence that they'd been told beforehand that in fact the German guns weren't even there to the point where the executive officer, who was supposed to lead the assault, rather than the commanding officer of the battalion, allegedly actually started to drink very heavily and said, "This is a suicide mission. You know, why are we doing this?" And looking at the cliffs here, it's easy to imagine why he had that view if there were no guns there to capture. But this was still a target that had to be taken. The battery position, they could not know with absolute confidence that the guns weren't there. Whatever the French resistance might be telling them, they still had to cut that coastal road, and if the guns were moved inland, they also had to find them and destroy them wherever they were sighted. So this is a critical objective.
The plan gave them half an hour to land, cross the beach, climb the cliffs and take on the Germans. And then once at the top, they were to signal the remaining 500 Rangers who were waiting for them a few miles out there to follow them in. Almost immediately, the plan went wrong.
Early on the morning of D-Day, the Rangers come towards the coast, heading towards the Pointe du Hoc, they think, but the coxswains make an error in navigation, and it's only as they approach the coastline that they realise they're going to the wrong place. So they have to turn by 90 degrees and run along the coastline towards their destination, towards the Pointe du Hoc.
But the error meant that they were already well behind schedule.
We were fired on while coming in. This was not a surprise. The enemy had had about 30 minutes to get up out of his underground bunkers. He was up there throwing hand grenades down by the bushel basketful and firing right down on us, and there was rapid fire situations on either flank that were firing into us. So we had that to come into. The ropes were fired up. There were grapple hooks. Some of them pulled out. The enemy, damn it, cut some of the ropes. You say that was not kosher, you know. And there were two guys on a rope right in front of me going up. So I started in behind them, about 50 feet below them. And the enemy was leaning over up there throwing down grenades, and I yelled up to these fellows. I said, "Boys, put your faces in and your butts out. They're throwing grenades." And about that time, there was a hellish explosion, very loud explosion, and I was knocked out for a while.
Against all odds, the Rangers' first assault unit made it to the top, and after heavy fighting, they found the German guns a mile inland and destroyed them. It was an amazing feat, but because these first guys were delayed, they weren't able to send the signal to the reinforcements to come in by the allotted time, which meant out at sea, the remaining 500 or so US Rangers now put Plan B into operation. They were to land on Omaha Beach, the other side of that headland, and then make their way here by land. But over on the beach, the carefully laid invasion plans were being blown apart.
The main force had to go in on Omaha Beach. And they were supposed to fight their way up to us by noon. And they got up there at noon on the third day.
On Omaha Beach, the German defences were completely intact. The men landing on the beach were now paying the full price for the failure of the Allied air bombardment.
Imagine the shock. In other words, you're told that you're going to see greatest firepower show on Earth. And then you hit the beach there, and everybody's alive. All the enemy forces are alert. It's going to be a bloody day. It's going to be a bloody day. It was a bloody day.
The first troops hit Omaha Beach shortly after low tide. In front of them was 300 yards of open sand.
As they land, they're in a natural killing ground. They're on beaches that are completely exposed to enemy fire. There is no cover. There's no trees, there's no trenches, there's no nothing. The troops are out there in the open.
They lowered the ramp, and we started filing off that thing, running off it, and the machine gun fire was going across the water. 88s were landing there. Screaming Mimis were coming in. It was just pure hell.
We were getting direct fire both from machine gun and artillery and that, and they dropped the ramp, and the fellows going off the ramp, that was it. They were getting hit right there. The machine gun fire was coming in there, and our first sergeant, he just flopped down there. The first two guys, they were just getting, so no, may as well try it another way. As far as I was concerned, I was on the right side, and I bailed out over the side, and the fellows around me were bailing off the side of the ship. You weren't going to run. There's no reason to be running off the front of that thing there.
You couldn't see from where the fire was coming. You couldn't see any gun flashes, no smoke. All you know is something's coming at you, and you don't know where it's coming from.
What amazed me was there were no bomb craters. Where were the bomb craters? We couldn't hide anywhere.
Well, there was just a mass of fellows laying all over the place over there. It was absolute slaughter.
So despite all the detailed planning, all the painstaking preparation, within minutes, it had all just gone wrong.
Absolutely, and this really is the evidence of just how badly wrong things had gone. This is an aerial reconnaissance photograph taken by an American aircraft that flew the entire length of Omaha Beach from west to east at about lunchtime. About 12 o'clock this photograph is taken. But the really sobering sight is all these little black dots, all these little black marks. These are all individual human beings. What we see here are the dead and the wounded. For example, here there's a small clutch of men who've probably been pulled up to the top of the beach, dragged up to the comparative safety offered by the seawall. We can see they're lying perpendicular. These are the guys who are wounded. They've been dragged up the beach and have got some cover from enemy fire. But there are much larger numbers strewn along the high water mark, lying parallel with the waterline. They've been washed up as the tide has risen. Every one of these black dots is a dead American soldier. In this single photograph of one small sector of Omaha Beach, there are over 100 young Americans lying dead along the high water mark. And if you imagine that this photograph, in order to get a mosaic of all of Omaha Beach, you need many of these alongside one another, many of them looking just like this, we get some sort of sense of the sacrifice made by American young men in order to unlock the defences of Omaha Beach. Hundreds and hundreds all along Omaha Beach.
Once I reached the beach, there's two fellows from my company there, Jim Slagle and Joe Daniels. Joe Daniels was full of holes in that there, and he was mumbling around there for a little bit, but he didn't last no time when I was there, and he went on.
I had never heard a German machine gun prior to that. American machine gun is dat 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 dat, and a German machine gun is brrt, 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 brrt. I mean, just spitting out shells so fast.
I got hit twice with machine guns in the arm, and it just about tore my arm off when it just flew me backwards and into the water, and it was there wasn't pain. It was just a thud. You didn't really know what was what till you looked down there, and my arm was just dangling, and the blood was just flowing out of there like it looked like I wouldn't last a minute and I'd have no more blood.
The assault on Omaha Beach was a costly one. Official records put the losses at about 2,000 men, dead, wounded or missing. But such was the devastation and carnage here on D-Day, for years nobody could come to an exact figure. Only now can it be revealed just how bloody Omaha really was. Joe Balkowski is the historian for the US Army's 29th Infantry Division and has spent years researching the events of Omaha Beach.
It was not in any way foreseen that the casualties would come with the intensity that they did in the first couple of hours of the invasion. From 6:30 in the morning to 9:30 in the morning on D-Day, American soldiers were being felled on the beach like stalks of wheat by a sickle.
Joe has studied hundreds of D-Day official documents. He believes the true casualty figure on Omaha Beach is more than double the number initially recorded.
The casualty count on Omaha Beach, in retrospect, was much, much higher than historians had previously thought. Realistically, only in the last couple of years have historians been able to figure out that the count was probably twice as high as first thought. In the range of 4,500 to 5,000 men became casualties on Omaha in an 18-hour period.
Ever since June the 6th, 1944, questions have been asked as to why there were so many more casualties on Omaha Beach. Simon True believes that senior American commanders not only accepted the possibility of high casualties, but had planned for them.
So given its situation, given what they had here, was this always going to be a bloodbath? Was it just inevitable?
The American intelligence analysts appreciated right from the beginning, many months before D-Day, that they were going to face real problems at Omaha Beach. They knew that they had to get ashore quickly, storm the bluffs, neutralize the enemy strongpoints before they could recover and start firing down onto Omaha Beach. The Americans weren't stupid. They realized that they might face really difficult problems here and they might sustain potentially thousands of casualties. The American First Army actually calculated that they might lose as many as 6,000 men at Omaha Beach. Actually a figure not very far from the truth.
But although the Americans had planned for thousands of casualties, they'd not been expecting to lose so many in the first 2 hours. With the German defences intact, the assault was rapidly unravelling.
Imagine all these guys, their buddies are killed, blood and guts everywhere, paralysis, shock. What the average human being does when they see blood, guts spread all over the place is they stop. They look and they stare. It's a human reaction. It's a gut reaction. Right? As a consequence of that, that's a great time to be targeted and killed. Right? You need to be moving forward. Right? Every time you stop on the battlefield, right, your chances of surviving diminish greatly.
Yeah, there were a lot of dead bodies, a lot of equipment, a lot of destroyed vehicles. The beach was blocked. You couldn't move. There was no radio communication. None. Absolutely none. And so you were in the wrong place. You didn't know why you were there or you know how you got there. And you couldn't go where you're supposed to go.
Those assault troops who were lucky enough to get across the beach faced an even greater peril, and that was, what do you do now? And for the moment, the only thing they could do was lie on their stomachs, because if they raised their head or stood up, they had a good chance of having it blown off. You couldn't go back and you couldn't go forward.
When I was hurt, shot on that there, and I'm laying on the beach, I felt bad that I wasn't able to be part of the group I was with. In fact, my conscience bothered me that I didn't. Here I am, just laying here. That bothered me. I hadn't done anything.
But the miracle of the assault of Omaha Beach now began. The displaced group of elite US Rangers from Point du Hoc arrived on the beach in the wrong place, but at the right time. and the impetus they brought would help to turn a potential disaster into victory. Joining up with the remnants of other units, these 500 extra men would fight their way off the beach and up the bluffs to attack the German positions from the rear.
I found out later that a general from the 29th 116th Infantry came up to Colonel Snyder of the 5th Rangers, and he said, "We're jammed up on this beach." He said, "You got to get these Rangers off the beach and lead the way up that hill."
The arrival of these guys is going to have an incredibly important effect. Going up those bluffs, inland to the village of Vierville, securing a defensive position against German counterattacks and outflanking the German positions along the bluffs here. It's going to be absolutely critical to the American success.
They pass the word when that wire blows, everybody goes through that wire and we go straight up that hill and everybody stays in line.
Had those Rangers gone where they were supposed to be, what would have been the ramifications of that?
Yeah, if we'd had the 500 Rangers who landed here going to the Pointe du Hoc as they should have done, then the soldiers here, the few survivors of the initial assault waves, probably would have been pinned down for many more hours. Who knows what might have happened? The Germans might have been able to launch counterattacks from this end of the beach to roll up the American position from the flank. And this part of Omaha Beach, the western end of Omaha Beach, is a real disaster. It's bad everywhere, but the western part is particularly bad. So the arrival of these Rangers, really, we can't exaggerate its significance. It's really very important indeed.
What had been so nearly a disaster was turned into a victory. The American soldiers fought their way off Omaha Beach to join up with the British and Canadians. The Normandy landings had succeeded. Of course, the war in Europe didn't end on D-Day, and another 200,000 Allied servicemen would die before victory was secured a year later. But it marked the beginning of the end.